The ancient stone corridors of Raven's Hollow Castle echoed with the measured footsteps of Marcus Thorne, head of the royal security detail. 20 years of faithful service had taught him to notice the smallest details, the subtle shifts in atmosphere that could signal danger to the royal family he had sworn to protect. Tonight, however, something felt different as he made his routine patrol through the East Wing. The castle had been home to the Ashford royal family for over 3 centuries. Its towering spires and elaborate chambers witnessed to countless generations of monarchs. Prince Alexander Ashford, heir to the throne, had grown up within these walls alongside his younger sister, Princess Isabella. At 35, Alexander carried himself with the dignity expected of a future king, while his 10-year-old daughter, Princess Charlotte, brought joy and laughter to the often serious halls of the castle. Marcus paused outside the princess's chambers, his trained ear catching the faint sound of muffled voices from within. It was well past Charlotte's bedtime, and protocol dictated that only family members and approved staff should be in her quarters at this hour. He checked his watch. 11:30 at night. The young princess should have been asleep hours ago. The voices grew clearer as he approached the ornate wooden door. One belonged to Charlotte, her young voice trembling with what sounded like fear or distress. The other voice made his blood run cold. It was Lady Victoria Blackwood, the woman who had married into the royal family 5 years ago, after a whirlwind romance with Prince Alexander's uncle, Lord Edmund Ashford. Victoria had always been a controversial figure within the castle walls. Beautiful and charming in public, she had won over the media and many of the nobility with her grace and apparent devotion to royal duties. However, Marcus had observed troubling behavior behind closed doors. There were whispered complaints from staff about her harsh treatment of servants, reports of explosive temper tantrums when things didn't go her way, and most concerning of all, several incidents involving the younger members of the royal family. Through the slightly ajar door, Marcus could see into Charlotte's bedroom. The princess stood near her canopy bed, still in her white nightgown, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Her long blonde hair was disheveled, and she clutched a small stuffed animal tightly to her chest. Victoria stood before her, elegant even in her anger, her perfectly styled dark hair catching the lamplight as she gestured sharply. "You will learn respect, young lady." Victoria's voice cut through the air like ice. "Royal blood or not, you cannot speak to me in such a manner. Your father may spoil you, but I will ensure you understand your place." Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. "I just wanted to call Papa. You said he was coming to read me a story, but he never came. I was worried something happened." "Your father has more important matters to attend to than indulging a spoiled child's whims," Victoria replied, her tone growing more venomous. "Perhaps if you spent less time being coddled, and more time learning proper behavior, you would understand that the world does not revolve around your desires." In all his years of service, he had never witnessed such treatment of any member of the royal family, especially not a child. Prince Alexander was known for his devotion to his daughter, often adjusting his schedule to ensure he could spend quality time with her. The idea that he would break a promise to read her a bedtime story without explanation was highly unlikely. "But Papa promised," Charlotte said, her voice growing smaller. "He always keeps his promises." Victoria's laugh was cold and calculating. "Promises are for people who matter, child. You would do well to remember that your place in this family exists only because of your father's position. Without him, you are nothing but an inconvenience." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. To speak to any child in such a manner was unconscionable, but to address a member of the royal family, a 10-year-old princess, with such cruelty was beyond acceptable. He reached for his radio to contact Prince Alexander immediately, but something made him pause. Victoria moved closer to Charlotte, and Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. In her right hand, partially concealed by the folds of her elegant evening gown, she held what appeared to be a small riding crop, the kind used in the royal stables for training horses. The leather implement caught the light as she raised it slightly. "Now, you will apologize for your disrespectful behavior, and promise never to bother your father with such trivial matters again," Victoria commanded, her voice taking on a threatening tone that made Marcus's protective instincts surge. Charlotte shook her head, her small act of defiance courageous despite her obvious fear. "I won't apologize for wanting to see my papa. He loves me, and he would want to know if you're being mean to me." The riding crop in Victoria's hand twitched, and Marcus realized with growing horror that she intended to use it. His mind raced through protocols and procedures, but nothing in his training had prepared him for a situation where a member of the royal family posed a threat to another. The political implications were staggering, but his duty was clear. Protect the royal family, especially the most vulnerable members. As Victoria raised the riding crop higher, her intentions becoming unmistakably clear, Marcus made his decision. He could not stand by and watch a child be harmed, regardless of the perpetrator's position within the royal hierarchy. However, he also knew that his word alone might not be enough to convince others of what he had witnessed. Victoria was skilled at presenting a different face to the world, and Charlotte was just a child whose testimony might be dismissed. Remembering the security protocols that had been updated the previous year, Marcus quietly activated the body camera that all senior security personnel were required to wear during their shifts. The small device, barely visible on his uniform, would record both audio and video evidence of whatever transpired. It was a precaution he had hoped never to use within the royal family's private quarters, but the safety of Princess Charlotte took precedence over privacy concerns. The atmosphere in the room grew more tense as Victoria's patience clearly wore thin. "You will learn obedience one way or another," she hissed, raising the riding crop in a threatening gesture that left no doubt about her intentions. Charlotte pressed herself against the ornate bedpost, her eyes wide with terror as she realized the danger she was in. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered, her small voice breaking Marcus's heart. "I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." But Victoria's face showed no mercy, only cold calculation and barely controlled rage. The mask of royal propriety had completely slipped away, revealing something dark and dangerous underneath. Marcus knew he could wait no longer. Whatever the political consequences, he could not allow harm to come to the young princess. Taking a deep breath and ensuring his body camera was recording clearly, Marcus prepared to intervene. The evidence he was gathering would change everything, not just for Victoria, but for the entire royal family. The truth about what happened in the shadows of Raven's Hollow Castle was about to come to light, and the consequences would be far-reaching and irreversible. As he reached for the door handle, ready to burst into the room and protect Charlotte, Marcus could only hope that justice would prevail and that the young princess would be safe from further harm. The next few moments would determine not just Charlotte's immediate safety, but the future stability of the entire royal household. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders as he prepared to take action that would forever change the dynamics within the castle walls. But looking at Charlotte's terrified face and seeing the weapon raised against her, Marcus knew there was no choice. Some lines could never be crossed, and protecting an innocent child from harm was worth any personal or professional cost he might face. With grim determination, he turned the handle and stepped forward into what would become the most significant moment of his career, and possibly the most important intervention of his life. The heavy oak door swung open with more force than Marcus intended, the sound echoing through Charlotte's chamber like a thunderclap. Both Victoria and the young princess turned toward the unexpected interruption, their faces showing vastly different reactions to his sudden appearance. "Step away from the princess," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades of military and security training. His hand instinctively moved toward the communication device on his belt, ready to summon additional support if needed. Victoria's expression transformed instantly from cruel determination to shocked indignation. The riding crop, which had been raised menacingly just moments before, quickly disappeared behind her back as she attempted to compose herself. Years of public appearances and royal training allowed her to shift into her practiced persona with remarkable speed, though Marcus noticed the slight tremor in her hands that betrayed her true emotional state. "Guard Thorn," Victoria said, her voice taking on the imperious tone she typically reserved for addressing staff. "You have no business entering the princess's private chambers without permission. This is a family matter that does not concern the security detail." Charlotte immediately ran toward Marcus, her small feet padding quickly across the Persian carpet that covered the stone floor. She positioned herself slightly behind his imposing frame, seeking protection from the woman who had moments before threatened her with violence. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, clearly indicating the stress and fear she had experienced. "Princess Charlotte," Marcus said gently, not taking his eyes off Victoria, "are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" The young girl shook her head but remained close to his side. "She was going to hit me," Charlotte whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the tense silence of the room. She had the horsewhip, and she said I needed to learn respect. Victoria's face flushed with anger at Charlotte's words. That is a completely fabricated story, she declared, moving gracefully to a nearby chair where she set down the riding crop as if it had been there all along. I was simply having a conversation with Charlotte about appropriate bedtime behavior. She has an overactive imagination, as children often do. Marcus observed Victoria's movements carefully, noting how she attempted to distance herself from the weapon and create an innocent explanation for its presence. However, his body camera had captured everything, and he was confident that the truth would be revealed regardless of Victoria's denials. "Lady Victoria," Marcus said, maintaining his professional composure despite his inner fury, "I will need to report this incident to Prince Alexander immediately. He should be made aware of any situations involving his daughter's welfare." The mention of Prince Alexander caused a flicker of something, fear perhaps, or calculation, to cross Victoria's features. She had always been careful to maintain her public image, particularly in front of Alexander, who remained largely unaware of her true nature behind closed doors. "There is nothing to report," Victoria insisted, her voice growing sharper. "I am a member of this royal family, and I will not be questioned by hired security. You were not invited into this room, and you have no authority to make demands of me." Charlotte tugged gently on Marcus's uniform sleeve. "She said Papa didn't want to see me tonight," the princess said, her voice still shaky but growing stronger with Marcus's protective presence. "But Papa always comes to read me stories. He promised he would come tonight after his meeting with the ministers." Marcus frowned at this information. According to his security briefing, Prince Alexander's evening meetings had concluded over an hour ago, and the prince had specifically mentioned his intention to spend time with Charlotte before she went to sleep. Something had clearly prevented him from keeping that promise, but what? "Where is Prince Alexander now?" Marcus asked, directing his question to Victoria while maintaining his protective stance near Charlotte. Victoria hesitated for just a moment too long before answering. "He was called away on urgent state business. These matters are far too complex for a child to understand, which is why I took it upon myself to ensure Charlotte went to bed at the proper time." The explanation felt rehearsed and hollow. Marcus had been responsible for the prince's security for years and was familiar with his habits and preferences. Alexander was incredibly dedicated to his daughter and would not miss their bedtime routine without explanation, especially not without sending word through the appropriate channels. "I will need to verify Prince Alexander's whereabouts and ensure he is aware of tonight's events," Marcus stated firmly. "Princess Charlotte, would you like me to escort you to your aunt's chambers while we sort this out?" Princess Isabella, Alexander's sister, lived in the adjacent wing of the castle and had always maintained a close relationship with her young niece. Charlotte's face brightened slightly at the suggestion, indicating that she would feel safer away from Victoria's presence. "That won't be necessary," Victoria interjected quickly, stepping forward with renewed authority. "Charlotte will remain in her own chambers as is appropriate. I am perfectly capable of supervising her bedtime routine." "With respect, Lady Victoria," Marcus replied, his tone remaining professional but firm, "given the circumstances I witnessed, I believe it would be prudent to ensure additional supervision until Prince Alexander can be consulted." "You witnessed nothing inappropriate," she snapped. "A conversation between family members is not cause for alarm, and I resent your implication otherwise." Charlotte moved even closer to Marcus, clearly frightened by Victoria's escalating anger. "She's scary when she gets mad," the princess whispered. "She told me Papa doesn't really love me and that I'm just trouble for everyone." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Marcus felt his protective instincts surge even stronger. No child should ever be subjected to such psychological manipulation, especially not from someone in a position of trust and authority. "Lady Victoria," Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "I strongly advise you to step back and allow me to handle this situation appropriately. These allegations are serious and will require a full investigation." Victoria's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Allegations? From a child who clearly doesn't understand adult conversations? And from a security guard who has overstepped his boundaries so egregiously that his employment should be questioned?" The threat was clear, but Marcus had faced similar intimidation tactics before. His loyalty was to the royal family as a whole, but his primary duty was to protect those who could not protect themselves. Charlotte fell squarely into that category regardless of Victoria's position or threats. "My employment and my actions tonight will be reviewed by Prince Alexander," Marcus replied calmly. "I am confident that he will want to know exactly what transpired in his daughter's chambers while he was absent." At that moment, the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside caught everyone's attention. The measured pace and familiar rhythm told Marcus that someone of importance was approaching, likely responding to the unusual activity detected by other security personnel. Victoria quickly moved to the mirror on Charlotte's vanity table, smoothing her hair and adjusting her dress to ensure she appeared composed and dignified. The transformation was remarkable. Within seconds, she had shifted from threatening and angry to serene and maternal. "Charlotte, darling," Victoria said sweetly, her voice now dripping with false affection, "why don't you tell whoever is coming that we've been having a lovely conversation about tomorrow's lessons? We wouldn't want anyone to get the wrong impression about our little chat." The manipulation was blatant and disturbing. Victoria was attempting to coach Charlotte into lying about what had transpired, using the child's natural desire to avoid conflict and please authority figures. Charlotte looked up at Marcus with confusion and fear in her eyes. At 10 years old, she was old enough to understand that something was very wrong, but young enough to be uncertain about how to handle the adult pressures being placed upon her. "Princess," Marcus said gently, kneeling down to her level, "you should always tell the truth about what happened tonight. No matter what anyone asks you to say or do, the truth is the most important thing." Victoria's face darkened at Marcus's words, but before she could respond, the footsteps stopped outside the door. A firm knock echoed through the chamber, followed by a familiar voice that made Charlotte's face light up with relief and joy. "Sweetheart, are you still awake? I'm sorry I'm so late for our story time." It was Prince Alexander, and from the concern evident in his voice it was clear that he had not willingly missed his appointment with his daughter. The pieces of the evening's puzzle were beginning to fall into place, and Marcus suspected that Victoria's explanation for the prince's absence would prove to be as false as her other claims. "Papa!" Charlotte's voice rang out with pure relief as she heard her father's familiar voice through the door. Before anyone could stop her, she rushed toward the entrance, her small hands reaching for the ornate handle. Prince Alexander entered the chamber with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own castle, but his expression immediately shifted from casual warmth to sharp concern as he took in the scene before him. His experienced eye quickly catalogued the details, Marcus standing at attention in a clearly protective posture, Victoria positioned near the vanity with an expression that didn't quite match her composed appearance, and most importantly, his daughter's tear-stained face in obvious distress. "Charlotte, what's wrong?" Alexander asked, immediately dropping to one knee to embrace his daughter. His voice carried the gentle tone he reserved for her, but Marcus could see the steel beginning to form in his eyes as he assessed the situation. Charlotte threw her arms around her father's neck, clinging to him with the desperate relief of a child who had been genuinely frightened. "Papa, I was so scared. I thought something bad happened to you. Lady Victoria said you didn't want to see me tonight, and then she got angry and—" "Hush now, sweetheart," Alexander said softly, stroking his daughter's hair while his gaze moved between Marcus and Victoria, clearly seeking an explanation for the tension he could feel in the room. "I'm here now. Tell me what happened." Victoria immediately stepped forward, her voice taking on the smooth, concerned tone she had perfected for public appearances. "Alexander, thank goodness you're here. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Charlotte had a bit of a tantrum about bedtime, and when I tried to help calm her down, Guard Thorne burst in and completely misinterpreted the situation." Marcus felt his jaw tighten at Victoria's blatant distortion of events, but he remained silent, knowing that Prince Alexander deserved to hear all perspectives before making his judgment. However, he was confident that his body camera had captured evidence that would contradict Victoria's version of events. Prince Alexander's brow furrowed as he looked at his daughter's face more carefully. Even in the soft lamplight, he could see the signs of genuine distress, the kind that came from fear, not from a simple bedtime tantrum. His daughter was generally well-behaved and rarely caused difficulties about going to sleep. "Charlotte," he said gently, "can you tell me exactly what happened? Take your time and tell me the truth." Charlotte glanced nervously at Victoria, who was watching her with an expression that appeared motherly to Alexander, but carried a subtle threat that the young girl recognized all too well. The child's hesitation was telling, and Marcus could see that Prince Alexander noticed it as well. "Lady Victoria was angry because you didn't come for story time," Charlotte began carefully. "She said you had more important things to do and that I was being spoiled. When I said you promised to come, she got really mad and said—" Charlotte's voice trailed off as she looked again at Victoria. "Go on, sweetheart," Alexander encouraged, his voice remaining gentle but his expression growing more serious. "You can tell me anything. No one here will be upset with you for telling the truth." Victoria's composure flickered slightly. "Alexander, surely you don't intend to interrogate the child over what was clearly a simple disciplinary conversation." Charlotte was overtired and emotional, which is why the situation became confused. Prince Alexander held up a hand to silence Victoria, never taking his eyes off his daughter. The gesture was subtle but carried clear authority. "Charlotte finished telling me what happened." "She had the riding whip," Charlotte whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "She said I needed to learn respect and that I was nothing without you. She was going to hit me with it, Papa. I was really scared." The silence that followed Charlotte's words was profound and dangerous. Prince Alexander's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, confusion, and then a cold fury that Marcus had rarely seen in his years of service. When the prince slowly stood to his full height, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees.
"A riding whip?"
Alexander's voice was deceptively calm, the kind of tone that experienced courtiers knew preceded explosive anger. "Victoria, would you care to explain why you brought a riding whip into my daughter's bedroom?" Victoria's carefully constructed facade began to crumble more visibly. "There's no riding whip, Alexander." Charlotte is confused and frightened. Children often mix up details when they're upset. Prince Alexander's gaze moved to Marcus, recognizing that his head of security had remained unusually silent during the exchange. "Guard Thorne, what exactly did you witness when you entered this room?" Marcus straightened to full attention, knowing that his next words would likely determine the outcome of this confrontation. "Your Highness, I observed Lady Victoria threatening Princess Charlotte with what appeared to be a riding crop. She was verbally berating the princess and had raised the implement in a threatening manner when I intervened." "That is completely untrue," Victoria protested, but her voice carried a note of desperation now. "This man burst into private family quarters without permission and is now fabricating stories to justify his inappropriate behavior." Alexander's sharp eyes moved around the room, taking in details he had missed in his initial concern for Charlotte. Near the vanity table, partially concealed behind a jewelry box, he spotted the leather handle of what was unmistakably a riding crop. His face darkened further as he walked over and picked up the implement. "This riding crop, Victoria?" he asked, his voice now carrying an unmistakable edge of anger. "The one that Charlotte imagined? The one that doesn't exist?" Victoria's face went pale as she realized her lies were unraveling. That must have been left there by mistake. Perhaps one of the stable hands was cleaning tack and, in my daughter's bedroom?" Alexander's voice rose slightly, his royal composure beginning to crack. "You're telling me that stable equipment accidentally found its way into the princess's private chambers at bedtime?" Marcus cleared his throat respectfully. "Your Highness, if I may, my body camera was activated during the incident. The recording would provide a complete account of what transpired." The mention of recorded evidence caused Victoria to take a step backward, her face showing the first signs of genuine panic. Body cameras were a recent addition to the castle's security protocols, implemented after several incidents involving visiting dignitaries. The footage would be indisputable proof of what had occurred. Prince Alexander turned his full attention to Marcus. "You have video evidence of this incident?" "Yes, Your Highness. Standard protocol requires activation of recording devices when responding to potential security threats. The safety of royal family members takes priority over privacy considerations in such circumstances." Victoria's carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. "Alexander, you must understand. The child was being impossibly difficult. She was refusing to follow instructions and showed complete disrespect for authority. Someone needs to teach her proper behavior before she becomes completely unmanageable." The admission was damning. By attempting to justify her actions, Victoria had essentially confirmed that the incident had occurred as described. Prince Alexander's expression shifted from anger to something far more dangerous, the cold calculation of a man who had been betrayed by someone he had trusted with his most precious relationship. "You raised a weapon against my daughter," he said, his voice now deadly quiet. "You threatened a 10-year-old child with physical violence because she wanted to see her father." Charlotte pressed closer to her father, sensing the change in the room's atmosphere. Even young as she was, she could feel the anger radiating from Prince Alexander and the fear that was now emanating from Victoria. "It wasn't a weapon, it was a training tool," Victoria protested weakly. "I was simply trying to establish appropriate boundaries and discipline. The child needs to understand that there are consequences for disrespectful behavior." "Consequences?" Alexander's voice began to rise, his royal composure finally giving way to parental fury. "The consequence of wanting to see her father should be violence? The consequence of being confused and scared should be threats and intimidation?" Marcus remained at attention but ready to intervene if the situation escalated further. He had never seen Prince Alexander this angry, and while the rage was completely justified, it needed to be channeled appropriately to ensure the best outcome for everyone involved, especially Charlotte. "Your Highness," Marcus said carefully, "perhaps Princess Charlotte should be escorted to Princess Isabella's chambers while this matter is resolved. The recording evidence can be reviewed properly, and appropriate actions can be determined." Alexander looked down at his daughter, his expression immediately softening as he met her worried eyes. "You're right, Guard Thorn. Charlotte, sweetheart, would you like to spend the night with Aunt Isabella? I think she would enjoy the company, and you two can have a sleepover." Charlotte nodded eagerly, clearly wanting to be away from the tension and conflict. "Will you come read me a story there, Papa? You promised, and you always keep your promises." "Of course I will, darling," Alexander said, kissing the top of her head. "Guard Thorn will escort you to your aunt's chambers, and I'll be along shortly to read you 3 stories to make up for being late tonight." As Marcus prepared to escort Charlotte from the room, Prince Alexander's gaze returned to Victoria, and the young princess could see that her father was preparing for a confrontation that would change everything. The truth was finally coming to light, and the consequences would reach far beyond this single night in the castle. The walk to Princess Isabella's chambers felt longer than usual as Marcus escorted Charlotte through the castle's moonlit corridors. The young princess remained unusually quiet, clutching a small stuffed rabbit that had been her comfort object since infancy. Marcus could sense her processing the evening's events in the way that children do, understanding that something significant had happened while struggling to comprehend the full implications. "Guard Thorn, Charlotte said softly as they approached her aunt's wing. "Is Papa very angry with Lady Victoria?"
Marcus considered his response carefully, knowing that whatever he said would likely be remembered and possibly repeated.
"Your father loves you very much, Princess. He wants to make sure you're always safe and protected." Charlotte nodded solemnly. "She said mean things about Papa not really loving me. But that's not true, is it?" The question nearly broke Marcus's heart. That a child should ever doubt her father's love because of an adult's cruel words was unconscionable. "Princess Charlotte," he said, stopping to kneel at her level, "your father loves you more than anything in this world. Nothing anyone says can change that truth." Princess Isabella's chambers were in the castle's north wing, a beautiful suite of rooms decorated in soft blues and silvers that reflected her refined taste. When they reached the ornate door, Marcus knocked gently, using the coded pattern that identified him to any security detail that might be present. Princess Isabella opened the door herself, dressed in an elegant silk robe and clearly surprised by the late-night visit. At 28, she possessed the same striking features as her brother Alexander, along with an innate warmth that had made her beloved among both the castle staff and the people of the kingdom. "Charlotte, what a wonderful surprise," Isabella said, immediately kneeling to embrace her niece. However, her experienced eye quickly noticed the child's distressed appearance and Marcus's unusually formal demeanor. "Is everything all right?" "Your Highness," Marcus said, "Prince Alexander has requested that Princess Charlotte spend the night in your chambers. There has been an incident that requires his immediate attention." Isabella's expression grew serious as she ushered them both inside her sitting room. The space was warm and inviting, with a fire crackling in the marble fireplace and comfortable chairs arranged for intimate conversation. What kind of incident? Is Alexander safe? The prince is unharmed, Marcus assured her. However, there was a situation involving Lady Victoria and Princess Charlotte that necessitates immediate investigation and resolution. Charlotte curled up in one of Isabella's large armchairs, finally allowing herself to relax slightly in the safety of her aunt's presence. Isabella sat nearby, her protective instincts clearly activated by her niece's obvious distress. "Charlotte, sweetheart, can you tell me what happened?" Isabella asked gently. As Charlotte began to recount the evening's events in her own words, Marcus excused himself to return to Prince Alexander's location. The corridor back to Charlotte's chambers seemed charged with tension, and he could hear raised voices emanating from behind the closed door as he approached. "Completely unacceptable behavior from someone in your position," Alexander was saying, his voice carrying clearly despite the heavy oak door. "The fact that you would even consider raising a hand against a child, let alone my child, demonstrates a complete failure of judgment and character." Victoria's response was harder to hear, but Marcus caught fragments. Overreaction, disciplinary measures, misunderstood intentions. Marcus knocked firmly on the door, knowing that his return with the body camera footage would be crucial to resolving the situation definitively. "Enter," Prince Alexander commanded. The scene inside the chamber had shifted dramatically during Marcus's absence. Victoria was seated in the chair by Charlotte's desk, her earlier composure completely abandoned. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her elegant dress was wrinkled as if she had been pacing or gesturing frantically. Prince Alexander stood near the window, his posture rigid with barely controlled anger. "Princess Charlotte is safely with Princess Isabella," Marcus reported. "Your Highness, you requested to review the recorded evidence." Alexander turned from the window, his expression grim. "Yes, I want to see exactly what transpired here tonight." Marcus removed the small body camera from his uniform and connected it to the portable viewing device that was standard equipment for security reviews. The high-resolution screen flickered to life, showing a clear timestamp and the beginning of the recorded sequence. The footage began with Marcus's approach to Charlotte's door, the audio picking up the conversation happening inside the room. Victoria's harsh words to Charlotte came through clearly. "You will learn respect, young lady. Royal blood or not, you cannot speak to me in such a manner." Alexander's face darkened as he heard Victoria's tone and words. This was not the voice of someone attempting to provide gentle guidance to a child. It was the voice of someone asserting dominance through intimidation. The recording continued, showing Marcus's view as he opened the door and saw Victoria standing over Charlotte with the riding crop raised threateningly. The young princess's terrified expression was clearly visible, as was Victoria's aggressive posture and menacing demeanor. "Your father has more important matters to attend to than indulging a spoiled child's whims," Victoria's recorded voice continued. "Perhaps if you spent less time being coddled and more time learning proper behavior, you would understand that the world does not revolve around your desires." Sister's sons clenched into fists as he heard these words directed at his daughter. The psychological cruelty was perhaps even more damaging than the threat of physical violence. The recording showed Charlotte's brave but futile attempts to defend herself and her relationship with her father. "But Papa promised. He always keeps his promises." Victoria's laugh on the recording was chilling in its coldness. "Promises are for people who matter, child. You would do well to remember that your place in this family exists only because of your father's position. Without him, you are nothing but an inconvenience." The words hung in the air like poison. Alexander turned to stare at Victoria, his expression showing a mixture of disgust and barely controlled rage that Marcus had never seen before. "An inconvenience?" Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. "You told my daughter that she was an inconvenience." Victoria's face had gone completely pale as she heard her own words played back without the filter of memory or interpretation. The evidence was undeniable and damning. "Alexander, you have to understand the context," she began desperately. The child was being completely impossible, refusing to follow basic instructions about bedtime. Someone has to teach her appropriate behavior. By telling her she doesn't matter, Alexander's voice began to rise. By threatening her with a riding crop? By attempting to destroy her relationship with her father through psychological manipulation? The recording continued, showing Victoria raising the riding crop in an unmistakably threatening manner as she said, "You will learn obedience, one way or another." Charlotte's terrified whisper came clearly through the speakers. "Please don't hurt me." "I'll be good. I promise, I'll be good." The sound of his daughter begging for mercy was more than Alexander could bear. His royal composure cracked completely, and for a moment, Marcus thought the prince might physically attack Victoria. Instead, Alexander turned away, his hands shaking with the effort to control himself. "Get out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying absolute authority. Victoria stood uncertainly. "Alexander, surely we can discuss this rationally. The child's testimony is unreliable, and even this recording could be misinterpreted." "Get out!" Alexander roared, spinning to face her with fury that made Victoria stumble backward in fear. "Get out of my daughter's room, get out of this castle, and get out of our lives." Victoria's face cycled through several emotions: fear, anger, calculation, and finally desperation. "You cannot simply banish me, Alexander. I am family. Edmund and I are married, and I have rights and position within this household. Your rights ended the moment you threatened my child," Alexander said, his voice returning to that deadly quiet tone. "Your position ended when you attempted to abuse someone under my protection. As for your marriage to my uncle, I suggest you discuss your future with him because you will not be welcome in this castle after tonight." Marcus stepped forward. "Your Highness, shall I escort Lady Victoria from the premises?" "Yes," Alexander replied without hesitation. "Ensure she packs only her personal belongings. All items belonging to the royal household remain here." "And Marcus?" "Yes, Your Highness. I want a full security review of every interaction Lady Victoria has had with any member of this family, particularly the younger members. If there have been other incidents, I want to know about them immediately." Victoria's face showed panic at the prospect of a comprehensive investigation. "Alexander, this is completely unreasonable. One misunderstanding should not result in such extreme measures." "One misunderstanding?" Alexander turned to face her fully, and Victoria actually took a step back at the intensity of his expression. "You threatened to strike my 10-year-old daughter with a weapon. You told her she was worthless and unwanted. You attempted to manipulate and gaslight a child into believing her father didn't love her. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is abuse." The word hung in the air with the weight of finality. Marcus knew that once Prince Alexander had categorized Victoria's actions as abuse, there would be no possibility of reconciliation or forgiveness. The prince's protective instincts regarding his daughter were absolute and non-negotiable. Victoria seemed to realize that her situation was hopeless. Her shoulders sagged as the full consequences of her actions became clear. I need time to collect my things." "You have 1 hour," Alexander said curtly. "Guard Thorn will supervise to ensure you take only what belongs to you personally." As Marcus prepared to escort Victoria from the room, Alexander called after him. "And Marcus, thank you. Your quick thinking and proper protocol may have prevented a tragedy tonight." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Just doing my duty, Your Highness. Protecting the royal family is my highest priority." As they left Charlotte's chamber, Victoria finally spoke, her voice bitter and defeated. "This isn't over, guard. You've made a powerful enemy tonight." Marcus looked at her with contempt. "Lady Victoria, the only enemy in this situation is someone who would threaten a child. I sleep well knowing I protected Princess Charlotte from harm. The long walk to Victoria's chambers would be the beginning of her exile from the royal court, but more importantly, it marked the end of a threat to Charlotte's safety and well-being. Justice was finally being served. 2 weeks had passed since the night that changed everything at Raven's Hollow Castle. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Princess Isabella's sitting room, where she and Charlotte were enjoying breakfast together, a routine that had become precious to both of them during Charlotte's temporary stay in the North Wing. Charlotte seemed more like herself again, though Marcus noticed she still startled occasionally at unexpected sounds and remained closer to trusted adults than she had before the incident. Princess Isabella had been a constant source of comfort and support, helping her young niece process what had happened while ensuring she felt safe and loved. "Uncle Marcus, Charlotte said as he conducted his morning security check. Papa said you're getting a special award for protecting me. Is that true? Marcus smiled at the title Charlotte had begun using for him. The informal address would have been inappropriate under normal circumstances, but Prince Alexander had specifically encouraged it, recognizing the special bond that had formed between his daughter and her protector. Your father has recommended me for recognition, Princess, but the real reward is seeing you safe and happy again. Charlotte beamed at his words, then grew more serious. Aunt Isabella says that what Lady Victoria did was very wrong, and that it wasn't my fault. She says some grown-ups have problems that make them mean to children. Isabella nodded approvingly. They had worked carefully with the castle's child psychologist to help Charlotte understand the situation in age-appropriate terms while ensuring she didn't develop lasting trauma or self-blame. That's exactly right, sweetheart, Isabella confirmed. Sometimes adults make very poor choices, but that's never the fault of the children involved. You were brave and strong, and you told the truth when it mattered. The sound of familiar footsteps in the corridor announced Prince Alexander's arrival. He had been spending significantly more time with Charlotte since the incident, adjusting his schedule to ensure she felt secure and prioritized. The door opened to reveal not just the prince, but also Lord Edmund, Victoria's estranged husband. Alexander's uncle appeared to have aged considerably in the past 2 weeks. The revelation of his wife's behavior toward Charlotte had shattered his world, forcing him to confront truths about Victoria that he had either missed or chosen to ignore. His marriage was effectively over, and the guilt of having brought such a person into the royal household weighed heavily on his shoulders. Good morning, everyone, Alexander said, his tone warmer than it had been in weeks. Uncle Edmund wanted to speak with Charlotte, if she's comfortable with that. Charlotte looked uncertainly between the adults. Lord Edmund had always been kind to her, but she was now wary of making assumptions about the intentions of adults in positions of authority. It's entirely up to you, sweetheart, Isabella said gently. You don't have to talk to anyone you're not comfortable speaking with. Charlotte considered this carefully, demonstrating the newfound assertiveness that her psychologist had been encouraging. What does he want to talk about? Lord Edmund stepped forward, his usually confident demeanor replaced by humble uncertainty. Charlotte, I wanted to apologize to you personally. My former wife, hurt you terribly, and I feel responsible for bringing her into our family where she could cause such harm. The 10-year-old studied her great-uncle's face with the directness that children often possess. Did you know she was mean to me before? The question was simple but devastating. Lord Edmund's face crumpled slightly as he shook his head. No, my dear child, I didn't know, but I should have paid more attention. I should have noticed the signs and protected you better. Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. Aunt Isabella says that when grown-ups make mistakes, the important thing is that they try to fix them and make sure they don't happen again. Your aunt is very wise, Edmund replied. I wanted you to know that Victoria will never be allowed near you again. She has been banished from the kingdom entirely and has no legal right to return or contact any member of the royal family. This was news to Marcus, who had been wondering about the final resolution of Victoria's status. Complete banishment was an extreme measure, typically reserved for the most serious offenses against the crown. Prince Alexander noticed Marcus's surprised expression. The investigation you recommended uncovered additional incidents, he explained grimly. Victoria had been emotionally and psychologically abusing several staff members' children, as well as making inappropriate threats toward other young family members during private visits. The pattern of behavior was extensive and deliberate. The revelation was sobering but not entirely surprising. Marcus had suspected that Charlotte's experience was not an isolated incident, but confirmation of systematic abuse made Victoria's banishment not just justified but necessary. What will happen to her now? Isabella asked. She has been stripped of her title and all privileges associated with marriage into the royal family, Alexander replied. Her marriage to Uncle Edmund has been annulled on grounds of fraud. She misrepresented her character and intentions when entering the union. She has been escorted to the border and is prohibited from returning under penalty of imprisonment. Lord Edmund looked older and more fragile as he nodded. The annulment was my request. I could not remain married to someone capable of threatening a child with violence. My loyalty is to this family and to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Charlotte surprised everyone by getting up from her chair and walking over to Lord Edmund. She wrapped her small arms around him in a comforting hug. "I'm sorry your wife was mean, Uncle Edmund. That must have made you very sad, too." The old man's eyes filled with tears at his great-niece's compassion. "Thank you, my dear Charlotte. Your kindness means more to me than you know." Marcus felt a surge of pride watching Charlotte demonstrate such maturity and emotional intelligence. Despite her traumatic experience, she was showing remarkable resilience and empathy. "Uncle Marcus," Charlotte said, turning back toward him, "Papa said you have something special to show me today?" Marcus smiled and removed a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. "Your father commissioned something special to commemorate your bravery. The gift is attractive, carefully revealing a beautiful pendant on a delicate chain. The jewelry was clearly designed for a child, with a small shield emblazoned with the royal crest and surrounded by tiny sapphires that matched her eyes. "It's beautiful," Charlotte exclaimed, holding it up to catch the morning light. "The shield represents protection and courage," Alexander explained, taking the necklace to fasten it around his daughter's neck. "It's a reminder that you are always protected, always loved, and always brave enough to tell the truth when it matters." "And," Marcus added with a grin, "it has a special feature." He showed Charlotte a tiny button hidden on the back of the pendant. "If you ever feel scared or unsafe, pressing this button will immediately alert the security team to your location. We'll always know if you need help." Charlotte's eyes widened with delight at the practical magic of the device. The pendant served both as a beautiful gift and as an additional layer of protection that would give both her and her father peace of mind. "Will you stay as our guard forever, Uncle Marcus?" Charlotte asked hopefully. Marcus looked to Prince Alexander, who nodded approvingly. "As long as your father will have me and as long as you feel safe with me protecting you, I'll be here." "Good," Charlotte said with satisfaction, "because you're the best protector in the whole kingdom." Prince Alexander placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "She's right about that. Your quick thinking and dedication to duty prevented what could have been a much more serious tragedy. The kingdom owes you a debt of gratitude." "I was simply doing what any decent person should do, protecting a child from harm," Marcus replied. "Princess Charlotte's safety and well-being will always be my highest priority." Isabella looked around the room at the group of people who had come together to protect and support Charlotte through her ordeal. "I think we've all learned something important from this experience. Evil can hide behind beautiful facades and charming smiles, but courage and truth will always triumph in the end." Charlotte nodded seriously, fingering her new pendant. "And family means protecting each other even when it's scary to tell the truth." "Especially when it's scary to tell the truth," Alexander corrected gently. "That's when truth matters most." As the morning continued with more relaxed conversation and genuine laughter, Marcus reflected on how the crisis had ultimately strengthened the bonds within the royal family. Charlotte was surrounded by people who truly loved and protected her. Victoria's threat had been permanently eliminated, and new safeguards were in place to prevent similar situations in the future. The investigation had also led to improved security protocols, better background checking procedures for anyone with access to royal family members, and enhanced training for staff on recognizing signs of abuse or inappropriate behavior. That afternoon, as Marcus conducted his rounds through the castle, he paused outside Charlotte's original bedroom. The room had been completely redecorated at her request. She wanted no reminders of that terrible night. New furniture, fresh paint, and cheerful colors had transformed the space into something bright and welcoming again. Charlotte had been brave enough to return to sleeping in her own room just the week before, though Isabella's chambers remained available whenever she preferred company. The healing process would continue, but the resilience of childhood was remarkable, and Charlotte was thriving under the extra attention and care from her family. As evening fell and Marcus prepared for the night shift, he received word that Princess Charlotte had specifically requested him for the bedtime routine. It had become their tradition. Prince Alexander would read the story, but Marcus would perform a final security check of the room while Charlotte was still awake, ensuring she felt completely safe before sleep. "Everything looks perfect, Princess," Marcus announced after checking the windows, the closet, and under the bed with exaggerated thoroughness that always made Charlotte giggle. "Thank you, Uncle Marcus," Charlotte said sleepily. "Will you be here when I wake up?" "I'll be here," Marcus promised, just as he had every night since the incident. "Sweet dreams, Princess." As he dimmed the lights and prepared to take up his position in the corridor outside, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary events that had brought them to this point. Evil had been defeated, justice had been served, and most importantly, an innocent child was safe. In his years of service, he couldn't ask for a more meaningful victory than that. The castle settled into peaceful quiet as another day ended safely under Marcus's watchful protection. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight all was well in the kingdom of Raven's Hollow.